I'm going to talk a little bit about models and views. A model is a C# class that stores data for your page, and that is where the business logic goes. When you set up a class, you're going to add properties to it like you would any other C# class. What you need to keep in mind is that you're going to be creating tables from these classes. So you really should think of a model class as a SQL table, because that is what it's going to become. Your properties are going to be columns in that SQL table. So you should be thinking about primary keys and foreign keys, like how am I going to connect my tables? Should be thinking about that kind of thing when you are setting up your models. So I've got a little example here, and I put a little comment over a contact ID because that'll be my primary key. And then down here for the foreign key, I have a comment that category ID is going to be my foreign key. So keeping that in mind when you are building these models. In ASP.NET Core, you can create a Razor View start page. And when the views are rendered, it goes through any code that you have in the view start.cshtml file first. So anything that you place in that file gets executed, and you don't need to put the code in each individual view. That's kind of why it's called a start file. So what typically is in the start file is the Razor command indicating that everybody is going to be using the layout view. Okay, and this is the command that indicates that. Now, along with a view start page, you can have what's called a view imports page. And a view imports page is just a way to make adding the using directives to your views easier, because you can put them all in the view imports page rather than individual views. So after the application renders or goes through the code in view start, it looks at what is in view imports. Okay, so it looks at both of those files if they exist, and it executes the code. And it saves you time because you don't have to add that same kind of startup and directive code to every single view. The view imports CSHTML file supports a whole list of directives. And here's an example of how you would add those directives. You can only have namespaces that are unique. Okay, so if you try to put the same namespace in there twice in a using directive, you're going to get an error. Okay, so keep that in mind. There is not a limit to the number of view import files that you can have. If you place that in the view folder, the main view folder, that will affect all of the subfolders or subdirectories. If you place a view import file inside a subdirectory, it only affects the views that are in that subdirectory. So if we look here, if we add view imports to views, it affects home and shared. If we add view imports to home, it's only going to affect index. Okay, and if you have it in both, it'll affect everything, and then the one that's inside home will override the settings that are in the one that's inside view. It's a lot like CSS, okay, where you have code that can override other code. Strongly typed views are the ones that are connected to the model. So you have to pull in the model, and once you do that, you can then use the properties to display the data that was passed from the controller. And this little example is assuming one row is passed from the database. We talked a little bit about tag helpers. They are quite often used in views. The most common are ASP4, which you are going to see all over the place in forms because it is going to connect the label and your input element directly to the model. So you say ASP-4 equals, and then you have the property name. ASP-action is used in the form tag itself or anchor tags, and it helps create href statement. ASP controller has the same use. It's used in form and anchor, and it helps format the href or where you are going to submit to. In the case of the form, it's more of the action statement, where it needs to go. And in the case of an anchor, it's more of an href. If you omit the controller, it assumes that you want to use the current controller. So if you don't want it making assumptions, make sure you put the controller tag helper in the code.